praying over this conversation.
Oh, yes.
Okay, we're gonna start any minute. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dominican Writers. My name is Angie Abreu, and I'm the founder of this platform. Tonight, we have a conversation on generational trauma and creating boundaries and healing. Our guests tonight are authors Lizbel Ortiz. Lizbel is a first-generation American-Dominican author, poet, and filmmaker. She was born and raised in Brooklyn. She published her first book, Let's Talk About It, por la Buena o la Mala, in 2020, where she peeled back layers of the taboo topics we have been told to keep in between the four walls of our Caribbean homes. She is working on her first short film detailing the trials that have shaped our elders, including the long-term effects of poverty, racism, sexism, sexual assault, and other major traumatic experiences that can be repeated. Her main goal is to uncover hidden pain that will eventually lead to intimate moments of healing, both personally and collectively as a community. Jasmine Cepeda is a Latinx psychotherapist working in private practice in Brooklyn. You can contact her through betternowtherapy.org or social media at Better Now Therapy. As a psychotherapy raised and still living in the diverse megacity that is New York, she has helped hundreds of folks from all races, ethnicities, and cultures cope with their distressing feelings and thoughts about their mothers. Jasmine is the author of 12 Ways to Cope with Your Latina Mom and Her Difficulties, Your Latino Dad and His Difficulties, along with the journal, Making Peace with Your Emotional Disconnection with Your Parents. Something that I could definitely relate to. Jasmine writes about the nuanced difficulties of Latina mothers and fathers, and says the experiences in facilitating groups with Latinx individuals, a gender-neutral term for Latinas and Latinos struggling with their parents. Being involved in these groups has clarified the similar and overarching grievances that many Latinx folks experience. Relationships with fathers are a crucial piece. Internalized misogyny, negative machismo attitudes, and patriarchal beliefs play significant roles in the psyche of Latina mothers and those of women in general. Ladies, thank you for being here tonight, for accepting my invitation. It's a pleasure to have you, and we may commence this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Angie, for those intros.
Right?
Yes. Okay.
You want to start, Jasmine?
Okay. Well, I mean, where do we start? It's a lot of, there's so many different themes.
Let's talk about the inspiration behind your work, right? What triggered you to write your books?
Okay.
It's probably more than one
do I go, huh?
I said probably more than one trigger, but what was
yes, that's what I'm thinking.
Said, I need to put this in writing and I need to share this with my community because I'm sure someone is experiencing this.
I think it was the group. That's why I felt like it was community led, because I just started the group and it was just going to be a group therapy. But then I would have so many notes, and we would do like little pamphlets, and then we would have journaling exercises throughout the week. And then I started to realize this should be a book, and also would help me do the groups easier. And so it just came naturally, and it was a useful tool as a way to just organize everything that was coming out in those groups. And then also a useful tool for anyone just to journal if you don't have the access to therapy or group therapy, especially now during the pandemic, because this was in person. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's still groups online, but it's just a little different when the group is in person. But I've done groups online, and they can be similarly healing and powerful too. But yeah, it just came naturally. The book just came out of the community, the group, and then me organizing my thoughts.
I actually can relate to that too, because for me, it was my community, you know, it was like living around so many different people and seeing, wow, we actually do relate so much in different things. And it was more so me collecting my thoughts and putting it onto paper so that I could kind of get the message across faster. Because I was doing the work within my community, within my family, within my neighborhood and my friends, but I wanted it to be something where other people and other cultures could get to the information a little bit faster.
Yes.
Thank you, ladies. I'm trying to pull your questions here, Jasmine. Talk about empathizing with immigrants' parents and how their poverty and lack of education, resources, and colonialism and processing of immigration to a new country with a different language can be extremely difficult. We often forget about our family struggles and their background, right? If we know about it, and we judge our parents so very easily. And then, you know, how can we teach our newer generation how to look at our parents with empathy? Right? Because we all know their upbringing was different. They're so very different from ours. So how do we teach that to our generation now?
Right. I think they usually tell us about their struggles. So we are already aware of it, and then we can empathize because they kind of already forced us to empathize and always think about how they got here and how they struggled and how they sacrificed. So it's sort of like they force us to never forget. So I think the empathy is a natural. I think most first gen feel empathy because we all know that it's hard to be immigrants. But sometimes when you have this is a complicated topic because not everyone's experience is the same, and it depends on your parent. Like I write in the book, some parents, you just have to have 1 or 2 conversations and they will never hurt you again. That's an amazing parent. Some parents, just starting off one conversation, they can't even talk because they get so activated and they get so charged and triggered and re-traumatized that you can't even start healing because the parent doesn't want to hear you really. Or they don't have the tools to regulate their emotions to then hear you or hear your emotions. So if you have that type of parent, that's a lot of work that the parent has to do, maybe find their own therapist. And if they don't want to do that, then it's mostly on the person to cope with what they got, which is this parent that doesn't have the tools to meet them where they're at. And I mean, so that's a long way to say, I think we have all like the primary empathy of just like, we all know it was hard to get here. We understand, we love them, good, and we're grateful. But then the secondary empathy of, which is harder, which is, wow, you really can't do this. Okay, like that's a little harder. And I think that's when the anger starts and the frustration and the arguing. Then it becomes an argument because you can't talk. And it's hard to empathize with your parent if they are triggering you. Now they're re-triggering you because you wanted to have a conversation, but now it's an argument. And then you can't empathize at that point because you're pissed off. So that secondary layer of empathy is like a way more work than the first layer because we all it's easy for us. But that second layer of saying, wow, my mom really can't have this emotional conversation. And I need to empathize with her, but I'm pissed off.
Yeah, but sometimes that lack of not being able to have an emotional conversation with your parents ends up traumatizing you.
Yes, right.
Right. And then that's when you now have this toxic relationship with your parent or a sibling or or other family member. And then you have to decide, you know, how am I going to X out this situation? Right. Lizbel, a lot of your social media content talks about teaching our elders about, you know, now, how do I put this together? Teaching them I guess, emotional communication, teaching them, how to possibly let go of that trauma and see things from our perspective and try to understand us, and teaching them how to have empathy with us, I guess, right? The other way around. Because we're now, I guess our generation is a lot more conscious of things, right? And a lot more vocal. And I could also say we're privileged, right? And that we can make choices, whereas our parents growing up, it was, you had an arranged marriage, tú te vas a casar con este tipo, that's just the way it is. You have to go to school, or you have to go to work, or you have to do things. I know a lot of my mother's choices growing up were based on the decisions my grandparents made up until maybe when my mom was in her 30s. Imagine that, right? So how do we, Lizbel, how has that been for you to, work with your elders and your siblings and letting them know, hey, this is messed up. We need to stop doing these things. This is toxic. It's, we need to create these boundaries.
I would say it's been frustrating. That's the perfect way I can put it into one. It's been frustrating because it's a lot of repeating yourself. But what I've learned throughout the years is that I try to meet people where they are. So I change my tone in different conversations that I have. With my mom, I might lead into a conversation a little bit softer because I know that she reacts a little bit faster than most people. With my father, I know that he has this like super big pride and ego. So I try to ease into conversations a certain kind of way so that at the end of the day, he gets the message. So as uncomfortable as it was growing up, now I try to meet people where they are and try to teach them in that manner. And fortunately, I have people that understand some of these things after we've had these conversations. But there are a few people who won't, you know what I mean? They just really will go against everything that is right because of what they were taught and what they were raised. And those are the people that I say that we kind of have to, cut our ties with, because there's really nothing much we can do, because eventually it starts to affect our life. So I meet people where they are. And if I see that you're showing progress, or that you're showing, all right, this person is actually trying to teach me something, that's where I stay. Like I stay with the people that I know want to learn and want to move forward and love me enough to respect those boundaries and move forward. So
how do you develop those tools though? Because I guess there's a moment that we're like, okay, we gotta stand up for ourselves and we gotta take action, right? Because especially if you're brought up in toxicity and you're traumatized yourself, sometimes your mind is not even thinking about the solutions, right? You're too immersed in your trauma to even think clearly. Right? And for you to find the tools like you did, Lizbel, how long did that take you? How did you come upon, okay, I need to try different tactics. I need to try this with my mom and try this with my father. Because I could tell you right now, I spent like 8 years not talking to my dad because he was just like the toxic person with all the patriarchy and DR and whatnot. And then when I saw him after 8 years, we just acted like nothing happened. And then like this past summer, we got into the shouting match and people just thought that, people just thought que era no marido mujer, because I was just shouting at him at the top of my lungs because I was just so angry. And then I'm like, it's my father. And we were like in public yelling. And then we get in the car and I'm crying and he's driving and I'm still yelling at him. And he's trying to talk to me. And I'm just like, but I know better. And I still allow this person to trigger me. It's hard. It's hard to, I know the tools. I have a master's in mental health. I talk to people all the time. And it's just like, sometimes those tools escape you. And it's definitely frustrating. You just want to grab them and strangle them and just.
That's for sure. But I also, you got to remember that you're human. Like, no matter how much information you intake, no matter how much research you do, no matter any of your experiences, you still are human and you still are going to have a reaction. You know what I mean? So you can't be too hard on yourself. I have my reactions every now and then, but one thing that I can say from my reactions now to my reactions maybe 8-9 years ago is that I can take accountability and I can apologize. And now, you know, I don't have out, because I was raised just in anger, like, because I felt like nobody was listening to what I had to say. So when I turned 18, 19, it was like an explosion. And I just like vomited all over everyone that I knew. And it was, and I was mainly driven by anger. And it wasn't until I started picking up a bunch of books on emotional intelligence, because I didn't want to live angry no more. I didn't want to be, you know, just with the flip of a switch, just turn into this erratical thing. So I started to research a lot on emotional intelligence and trying to understand why I was angry. And I sat with myself for a really long time to figure out where my anger was directed and how it was still affecting me. And that's when I realized I had a lot of resentment towards my mom. So much resentment towards my mom because she had left my father at an early age. And I was like a super daddy's girl. But as a little girl, I looked at her like, oh my God, how dare you try to take my dad away? How dare you kick him out and do all of this? And then as I grew as a woman, I'm like, that was the absolute best thing you could have done. Thank you. But it's like, I would have never been able to sit across from her and tell her, listen, what you did, leaving a toxic marriage and being cheated on and having all of these things with 3 children in a country you didn't, you know, weren't born in, that was a big step. And I made it harder on her. And that was a big accountability that I had to take. I had to sit across from her and say, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't understand, but now I do. So that was one of the biggest breakthroughs for me, honestly.
I mean, that sounds like it took a lot from you to do that. It took a lot of self-reflecting, which I guess was something that when you're angry, it's hard to reflect because you're so angry. Right. So learning about emotional intelligence is one way people can just pick up a book and learn for themselves. What do I do when I'm angry? What can I do? What are some soothing mechanisms? And then I can think, because when you're pissed off, you can't.
I read one of those books a long time ago.
Right. So that's the other part. There's a lot of self-help books, right? But then that's why I wrote mine. It's a self-help book, but it is more interactive, and I'm looking at it. It is more interactive, and it's something that it's useful for group therapy. Like that was the whole point, but I never really put it out there as like, therapists, go do the group therapy. So it's more of a take action, like go to therapy, go to the group therapy, or because you can't really do it on your own, that work. Specifically regulating your emotions, you learn that even though you can read it in a book, you actually learn it through co-regulation with someone else. And usually you learn that if you have a good enough parent, your parent will teach you, because your parent doesn't need to be perfect. They just need to be good enough that you somewhat kind of can manage your emotions and you don't, act out in public. But with a lot of our parents coming from a culture or just being impoverished, they didn't have opportunities to learn that. Their grandparent or our grandparents didn't have the tools to teach them. And so they come here and we don't know, they don't teach us. And so then we get stuck. So yes, you can read a book about it, but the co-regulating is so important. It's like a human experience with another human that you could only learn through being in relationship. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that, I guess.
Jasmine, could you define intergenerational trauma for us all?
Okay, well, first I want to give the credit to, I'm forgetting the names, but they were like these Jewish researchers who coined the term transgenerational trauma, if I'm something like that. But then it came to be intergenerational trauma. But they created that term because of their own community cultural experience of being in the Holocaust. So that's just an example of how communities can change psychology, can change the whole movement. because right now it's very whitewashed, but obviously there's more and more therapists and more professionals in the mental health field of color. So now we can actually put our input. And intergenerational trauma is just another example of how a culture put their input and said, hey, we went through the Holocaust, and now every generation after us has trauma. We use that, we helped, communities help each other out. They've helped us out, they've given us that term, and now we've taken it to also include Dominicans, Latinos, Black people. Everyone has gone through intergenerational trauma because of their own cultural shifts that happen in our history. So I would say, number one, it's human experience, because we've all had it. And number two, it could be a plethora of examples, like poverty, violence, war, immigration, having a history of your parents or family members being detained, going to jail. Like, if you keep seeing these patterns in your family, that's intergenerational trauma, because these are traumatic events that keep happening every generation. So it's a vague definition, and that because it can get so specific for everyone can have their own unique experience. Yeah.
Wow. So here you spoke about, history, the languages, and the, you said, for examples of intergenerational trauma that can be passed on to your parents for lack of knowledge, history, language, resources, communication and boundaries, emotional availability or intimacy, for patriarchal and sexist beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Right. Those are examples of what can be passed down.
So what are some burdens and gifts of intergenerational trauma?
So that's the burden of that, you get that passed down to you and you have to work with it. Either you lean towards it and now you just keep repeating it because it's too hard. It's really hard work. And also traumatizing work. It's traumatizing to have to work on all this trauma.
Yes.
So it's okay. Some people just say, hey, you know what, this is too much. I'm going to keep doing it because this is easier. And that's their right, because some people are fragile. They have fragile psyche.
Teaching that to your kids.
That what?
You end up teaching that to your children.
Right.
So they're learning that behavior from you, and then they're passing it on to their kids as well. So in that line, no one is addressing anything.
Right. So that is the burden, that someone needs to take the first step. And this doesn't mean that you're going to save the whole family. This could just be a first step for you and your family, whoever you, yourself, your significant other, if you choose to have children, you and whoever you have a family with, because your nuclear family, the family you came from, might not be ready to handle what you have to say or change. And I was just going to say that some people, including our parents, are too fragile and they can't handle the truth. That's why that quote, that cliche, you can't handle the truth. Some people really literally can't handle it. They have a mental breakdown. They want to commit suicide.
That's the case in a lot of our Caribbean families.
Right.
Yes.
They have mental breakdowns.
Yes.
But that's because they literally cannot handle it. And the people do commit suicide or jump on the train, like do horrible things. So the parent needs to go get their own therapy and go get their own treatment, figure out a way that they could manage little by little some work, because it's work. Like, can you do a little work every week or once a month or whatever they want? Like, it's not impossible. That's the thing. It's not impossible. There's Spanish speaking therapists. There's so many resources, especially in New York City. But the stigma of going to get mental health treatment, they are very hardcore with that.
Yes. So I recall when I was doing my internship, when I was getting my master's in mental health, we had a research study where I was working, and it was to measure the ways in which Latinos would prefer to receive these resources, whether they will go to a therapist, whether they will go to church, or whether they would take meds. So it was, the therapist, talk therapy, spiritual guidance, and then medication. And a lot of them, of course, said spiritual guidance, right? Because, you go and you speak to a priest and you go into this box, you never see their face, right? You're confessing all your sins. And then they dicen, vete para tu casa and do de que 50 Ave Marias and you good to
Yes.
right? But then you come back to church and you're still doing the same behavior. Right? I mean, this is one reason why I left church, because I just couldn't with the hypocrisy. And it's so difficult to convince our parents and our loved ones, Latinos at that therapy is okay, that therapy is good, and that, you have ethical boundaries of not divulging anything to share with you, right? Like, I remember I had to explain that to my mother. Because I would say, Ma, what are you talking to are you actually talking to your therapist? Are they giving you homework? And she was like, I know. ¿Y cómo yo le voy a contar la cosa al terapeuta? Ay, una vergüenza, we have that belief que los problemas se quedan en la casa. You're not supposed to talk to anyone out there, right? La ropa sucia se lavan en la casa, right? So there's that, right? Sharing your problems with anyone. And then I had to sit her down and explain to her how that worked and what was the role of the therapist. And I said, look, Ma, unless you show that you're going to cause harm to anyone or to yourself, they're not going to say anything. If you're not going to commit a crime, those are the things that is going to make them go out and talk about your stuff. But other than that, they're a vote. Say what you want. And she was like, oh my God, really? And I'm like, yeah, go take advantage of your therapy session.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but my mom is more open-minded. She's open to learning about things like that. Pero al contrario, yo tengo una tía that is like, nah, I'm good.
Exactly.
So what do you go to therapy for if you're not going to talk about your problem? Why are we still dealing with the same things every year?
I mean, like I said, I think there's a level of trauma that everyone has. I don't know what you want to call it, but a capacity. It's just like, it could be your temperament, your personality, your environment, obviously, your upbringing, but there's so many factors, but everyone has a capacity to deal with trauma, a certain amount of trauma. And once you pass that capacity, you really you need to keep it in denial. There's some people that they've hit their limit of trauma in their lifetime. And so now it's like, it's a closed book and I can't, because if I open it, the shit it's gonna break. There are other people that they have trauma, but it's manageable and they can talk about it and they can go to therapy and
I call that
do the work.
Trauma.
Right.
Still getting up.
Right.
You're still getting up and doing what you got to do with that. That trauma is walking along with you.
Exactly.
Like holding a child's hand, you holding that trauma's hand along the way through life.
Yes. And all trauma is horrible and painful, and pain is pain. But I'm just saying that there's some people that because of they didn't have the resources, their parents didn't give it to them, that their capacity for the trauma is very low. So if they were to go to therapy, obviously they would need to tell the therapist, or the therapist would have to figure that out, because I don't think they would tell them. And the therapist and the therapy would have to be very, very slow. Like you start in kindergarten, because we need to know what does it mean to feel sad? Like, this is what the work would be for our parents. And I have clients like that who are 60-year-old Dominican women. Well, just one. But that's my work with her. It's just slow, very slow. And that's what they need, because they can't be bombarded, overwhelmed with too much too fast, because that is trauma. That's trauma. Too much too fast is traumatic. And so that's why it's hard to communicate with our parents, because we're hitting them with a lot.
Right.
And they probably can't handle it.
So like Lizbel said, you got to spoon feed them, and you got to figure out what's the best mode of communication between you and that person, right? How do receptive are they to receiving this information that you're sharing with them, right? Lizbel, you talk a lot about the lack of support that you had growing up, and how you felt manipulated and gaslit, and that you well into your 20s, and this is when you started to be vocal. What was that turning point for you to just be like, that's it, I have to do something?
It was probably when I saw that everybody almost related to what I was saying. Because when I was growing up, I was surrounded by older people who were basically telling me, you are nuts, you are crazy, you don't know what you're talking about, you're just a little girl, you're losing your mind, that's okay. You know, everybody around me was just basically telling me I was crazy. And and even if I was right, I was made to feel like I was wrong because I was younger, and because I was also challenging the normal for them. When I grew up, and I had a community of friends and people from different ethnicities and all over the place, and they are experiencing the exact same thing that I was, the exact same thing. And it wasn't until, again, I started picking up books and doing my own research and falling in love with emotional intelligence and people in general, was that I was like, all right, this is not normal. It's not normal to be responded to like that as a child. It's not, it's not normal to be treated and kind of made to feel like what you're saying isn't correct. Because now, well, for a lot of my life, because of that, I was questioning a lot of what I thought or what I did or what I said. And now looking back on it, I was right. For most of it, I was actually right. But because I was young and I was a little girl and I was challenging these normals from people who were in their 30s and 40s and 50s and up, I had no chance. Not at that age. I don't feel like I had a chance. But, I trucked my way through it, honestly.
Right. I think as Caribbean children, we are raised to believe that we don't have an opinion, we don't have feelings. And we're basically, I don't even know how to describe it, como mueble. Like, just siéntate ahí, do as you're told, don't say anything. I don't care if you feel bad about this. I don't need to hear how you feel about this or what your opinion is about this. Your voice doesn't count. It doesn't matter because you don't know anything, right? Exactly. And I was brought up like that. I had a conversation with my kid the other day because we were walking to the train station, and I was like, he never likes me walking him to the train. He's 14, right? So I said to him, how come you don't like for me to walk you to the train station? He's like, Mom, because you always want to have a conversation.
Great.
And I said to him, you know what? You should appreciate the fact that I don't ignore you. You don't know what's it like to grow up with a parent that ignores you, or a parent that never has anything nice to say to you. And the only time they do say something to you is to berate you, to call you names, to tell you how stupid you are, to humiliate you, and never, ever sit down and have a human conversation with you, And I said, that's how I was brought up. And I don't want to raise you like that. So yeah, we're going to have conversations.
Yes. You're going to see him and want to get to know him.
Right. I'm like, we're going to talk about some stuff, Yes. And he just looks at me and rolls his eyes. And I'm just like, this child. But, many of us are raised like this. And I'm so glad that we have people like you, Lizbel, that you're so vocal on social media and you call it out how it is, even though people get mad and probably send you these DMs that you're just like, aghast with, but we need stuff like that. And I'm glad that this generation is so vocal, because it took me into my mid-30s to be vocal, and our parents probably never learned to be vocal. I think my mom probably started advocating for herself in her 50s. She realized, oh, yo puedo vivir mi vida.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, what? I have full control of my life, and I could do as I please, and no tengo que rendirle cuenta a nadie. And that's really sad, because I could have conversations with my mom and tell her, were you ever happy? Were you ever in love? Or did you just navigate through life, following instructions that your parents gave you because you felt that it was your obligation to do those things, right? But not us, slowly, I think every generation is rebelling a little bit more against those things, and, paving our own way, making our own decisions and forming our own opinion. And also, having these conversations like this, where we're learning how to create healthy boundaries and how to remove ourselves out of toxic environments. I think that's super important. Could we talk about church?
Yes.
Come on, Lizbel, what you got to say about church?
Church, I would say, I think that religion in general is one of the most dividing factors that we have, especially in the older generation, because like you said, they use church as their saving grace, so whatever bad they do, whatever happens on the outside world, it get clean whenever they step into a church. So whether, a lot of our parents were absent or like alcoholics, and, just students of trauma, basically people who had their own things, they would use church Sunday, where it's like, all right, this is the all and be all. I don't have to do therapy. I don't have to be better. I don't have to treat you any better. I don't have to talk to you. I don't have to treat you like a child. I don't have to be a good person. I just have to go to church on Sunday, make a confession, go eat the bread of Christ, and then
wipe the slate clean.
Yeah, wipe the slate clean. And I think that unfortunately a lot of our parents lost themselves in the church and continue to lose themselves in the church. Like my mother, she's one of the people who used the priest as like their therapist, because in our community it's like, oh, just go talk to the priest. If you having relationship problems, go talk to the priest together. And those were the people who gave her some of the worst advice that she could get, which is usually stay silent, just do what you need to do, and just
put up with it too, right?
Yeah, it's always put up with it and do it silently.
Stand by your husband, accept all their behavior. Your role as a woman is to be supportive and be there for them, and basically forget about yourself.
Yeah.
So how did your mom manage to grow out of that?
Well, I feel like my mom has learned with me. As I've like grown throughout the years, I've kind of like you said, spoon-fed her little by little, and she started to get control over her life again. She left her husband. He's an ex now, but she was married in a really toxic relationship after my father. So my mom, like you said, never had a childhood. She never had a womanhood. It was literally when she got married when she was young, she came here, she had children, she was a mom all of that time, and she got remarried, and she was basically just his wife and his, his assistant for her whole life. The last 2 years are the first years in her life since she was probably 18, where she just gets up and she says, yo, this is what I decided to do today. It's, for her, it's weird to be able to make decisions over her own life.
Wow.
Like, it's for her to be able to say, oh, I want to go get my nails done, and she doesn't have to check with anybody. She had to learn that process. Like, I had to teach her how to be a woman and stand on her own, and basically how to not tolerate disrespect and how to speak up for herself too, which was the main thing, because my mom, probably like many of our moms, are like the backbone of our family. And it's like the lady from Encanto, like you put whatever you can on her, you don't care about her, but as long as she could get it done for you, that's all that matters. And I had to teach her how to make her own boundaries with people that she's been people pleasing her whole life.
That's a lot. We have some comments here from our YouTube. Afro Latina Natural is asking, do you believe dictatorships in Latin American countries had any impact on society to not be open or speak up? The notion of la ropa sucia se lava en la casa.
Yes, definitely. And that's the other thing that I mentioned about intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma includes not knowing your own history because your ancestors have been killed through genocide and colonialism. Like, that's traumatic, that we don't know the native language of the indigenous Tainos in Santo Domingo, whatever. What was it called before that? What did they call it? Like, how were they feeling living in the land? We just know Spanish because of Spain and the colonizers. We know the history from them, from when they started killing us, and then the slaves and Trujillo, and that's really the highlights. And then obviously there's a more corruption in DR especially, and political, what's the other word? But yeah, basically corruption. And then our parents come to America not really understanding the politics or history in their country. Not all of them, but I'm saying some of them, if they've been in the, my family came from the campo, so they weren't up to date with what was happening. So that's another way of having trauma, like not having the resources to know, not having the resources to go to school because you have to work, and not having the resources to even learn, just read a newspaper or read is another thing. Not knowing how to read, which a lot of people didn't get the chance to read because they had to work.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's it.
That one of the main reasons why our generation is kind of like pushing the envelope forward in that is because we have the privilege of being educated. Our parents came here, most of them not knowing how to read, like Jasmine just said. And we had the option to learn 2 different languages and read in 2 different languages and be able to pick up a book and have access to libraries and newspapers and TVs with information. And if there's something that you want to study, you can go to a library and say this. You could go on your laptop. Our parents didn't have any of this. Yeah. All they had were their parents telling them, listen, you need to work and you need to provide. You need to have children and you need to go to church. That's all that they knew. So when they tell us, who cares about your feelings? What are you talking about? Just do what you have to do. It's like they're repeating to us what their parents told them. They don't understand emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? I don't even know if I'm sad or not. I don't know how to dissect that feeling. I just know that I don't feel good and I'm going to take it out on you. But I don't know if I'm angry. I don't know if I'm sad. I don't know if I'm resentful. I just know that I'm not happy right now, So I forgot the question.
Me too.
It was so the question was about the dictatorship. If you think it had any influence in the way our parents behave, the not speaking up.
Yes, absolutely. Because I know for the Dominican Republic, Trujillo was a tyrant. Anybody who spoke out against him, he had him killed, and he was very vocal about that too. So a lot of the things that they had going on in that time, which is what he wanted to erase Blackness from the country. So he had Haitians and he had dark-skinned Dominicans killed. And then when those things were happening, they weren't broadcasted to Dominicans. They were purposely left out of the light. And, they were, so the ignorance, I like to talk about it, but it's also not their fault. You know what I mean? Like now it's their fault if you resist against learning. And you say, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to learn about that. If you resist, now it's ignorance. But so many people, even me, like growing up, I just knew I was Dominican. I didn't know people, because I grew up around a lot of African Americans, and they would say, oh, yeah, Dominicans are just Black people who got off a boat. And I remember I was like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't get what you mean by that. Because I just thought Dominican was just like there was white and there was Black and there was Asian. I thought Dominican was just
Dominican was the fourth.
Exactly. Like those kind of statements is what made me want to research the Dominican Republic and the history behind it. But our parents, you know, like I don't put too much pressure on them. Growing up, I did, because it was like, how don't you understand this? How don't you see what I'm seeing? But now I can look at them through the eyes of like the privilege that I did have of being able to learn and research and do all of these things. And that's now I have empathy and compassion for them, and I could like ease into these conversations. But I definitely think that Trujillo and just the way the governments work back home have a lot to do with the way our parents maneuver and raise us over here.
Mm-hmm.
Jasmine, I know you have to leave early, so I want to direct these last few questions to you. What are coping ways for generational trauma?
Okay. So I already said therapy, but there's so many different types of therapy. And obviously talk therapy, there's so many: CBT, DBT, ACT, so many acronyms.
That people should research.
Yes.
There's a lot of folks go get a therapist and have no idea what the specialty for that therapist is. And it might be that what you need is not what they offer.
Yes, yes. So, but for intergenerational trauma and BIPOC, I would say find a BIPOC therapist. Like, so it's easier. So it's easier. You don't have to explain. Like, you just get there and that's easy. And it's less traumatizing. It's traumatizing to explain things to white people, because it just reiterates like you don't understand because you're fucking white. Sorry. So you find a BIPOC. Yes. It's true. So you find a BIPOC therapist and research their modalities. But I think for intergenerational trauma, psychodynamic work is best because it is going to go back to your past. And somatic therapy, which is less talk and more feeling and more focusing on your body and your nervous system and co-regulating with the therapist. So it's about actually feeling the feeling in therapy. So it's not really talking. Yes, you have to talk, to explain, but you mainly feel. And that's also very healing for intergenerational trauma. So that's therapies. And then, obviously there's more movement, just moving your body, like dancing or running, working out, just moving your body when you're emotionally charged, just to release some of that energy. And then what other ways? Journaling, processing it through language and writing it.
You have your journal here.
Yes,
right?
Yes. Journaling is really helpful. It also just shifts your brain to do something different than the activating feeling that you're feeling. What else is there? Anything that's soothing, that soothes you. I guess I'm really saying things that could help you cope with emotions too, because intergenerational trauma is it's just like a blanket statement. But like when you get specific, let's say someone's like, my mom is screaming at me the way my grandmother screams at her, and now I'm angry. Noticing, okay, this is a pattern, this is intergenerational trauma, noticing your feelings, taking a nice walk, doing anything that soothes you and calms your nervous system, and then journaling, processing. And then the last thing, if you have someone to talk to, whether it's a therapist or a friend, you need that support when you're highly activated. That's the only word I keep thinking, or highly like emotional is another way to put it. And I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, you also spoke about breaking the patterns of abuse and intolerable behavior, which is hard in itself, right? Because sometimes that might mean breaking up relationships.
Yes. So that's the thing, setting boundaries. And I wrote that in the book. Sometimes setting boundaries defines the relationship. Like all we have are boundaries because you're so triggering and you don't listen to me or you don't respect me, which is the main thing. It's really respect. If you want someone, if you're telling someone, hey, I don't like when you do that, and they keep doing it, it's like, right. And you have to respect yourself first. So sometimes that means boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. And then sooner or later you see them once a month. Not because you chose, because they also have, they didn't respect you.
And there's those moments where you become the enemy in the family because people look at you, oh, ella cree que sabe más que todo el mundo, right? Or you Lizbel, you know what I'm talking about. You sitting at that dinner table and you say something and people just like, why you got to bring that up again?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we talking about this? That happened in the past, right? Sometimes inviting that toxic family member and you don't want to come to that dinner and people just like, well, why you can't come? And it's like, I think I'm one of those people that I have like separated myself from like my family, and I'm only close to my immediate, which is just my brothers and my mom. And then everyone else, I'm just like, yeah, don't even invite me to none of your stuff, because I have zero tolerance anymore. And I know that I'm just like going to vocalize something and I'm going to just ruin your dinner. So just don't invite me.
Right.
Because it's just patterns that you constantly see and behaviors. And you're just like, do I still want to be around this? Do I still want to put my energy toward having these same arguments with these people?
Mm-hmm. And I want to say before I leave that is the gift of the intergenerational trauma, that you get to learn the preciousness of life. Like, do I want to enjoy my day, or do I want to go back to around people that don't respect me and dismiss me or gaslight me and manipulate me? So
we on that topic, Carolina asked, she said, what do you do with the inevitable guilt you feel when you have to move on without your mom? Meaning you've tried to spoon feed this information to them and nothing is working.
So guilt is a big topic. That's a whole nother hour. That's you work through. Yeah, that's a whole, I would, you work through it in therapy, or I don't know how else you would work through guilt. I don't know how else. I really don't, because you need a lot of support. Because it's not just guilt. That's the thing. And I don't want to ramble because I could do that. Right, so I'm just going to say two things. Yes, guilt is also about grief. The grief that you didn't get what you had, or you lost a childhood and you lost an opportunity because your mother or your dad wasn't the way that they could have been. They had potential. We all have potential, and they couldn't reach their potential. And now you didn't have that childhood. And now you want to move on, right, from the childhood and the trauma. And maybe you've gone through therapy, it's 2 years. Okay, and I'm done with the childhood stuff. You're going to feel some guilt because you are separating. Finally, you're separating. It's actually very normal to separate. When you have a healthy relationship with your parents can tolerate it and they welcome it and they tell you to leave because they want you to grow and they know you'll come back. Now, when you were leaving a toxic relationship with your parents, you might not. What is coming back though? Because you never were there. You never had that relationship. So you're just moving on. You're moving on. You never had it to begin with. And it's less likely now as an adult because, or you don't, depending on the parents. But if your parent, like in this example that the person's asking, if the parent doesn't want to be spoon fed and doesn't want to change, you have to move on. And that means it's almost like a breakup. You kind of feel guilty when you break up with the guy or whoever, and they don't have their shit together. You're leaving them worse off. But that's not your fault. That's on them. You tried your best.
Right.
So, yeah.
We have one last question for you, Jasmine. Is it our responsibility as children to develop relationship with our parents as we work through this disconnection?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Latino parents will be like, pero eres tú que me tienes que llamar a mí, no yo. I get
Yes.
all the time.
Yes. Wait, can you repeat the question?
So he's asking about, is it our responsibility to work on these relationships, right, with our parents when there's a disconnection?
No, it's just it's just a way people, not all, like everyone's different, and some people want to try. Yeah, and it doesn't hurt to try. Some people, maybe they've tried in their own way, and so they don't want to keep trying as adults. Because as kids, we do try in our own ways. Unconsciously, we try to connect, and the rejection, the ignoring, the gaslighting as kids, like that tires us out. By adults, you know, by the time you're an adult, you have to have a lot of patience to want to keep trying with your parents. You've already been trying so long. So you don't have to keep trying. They're grown adults, right? Shouldn't they also put 2 and 2 together? Like, shouldn't they also have time to think about their parenting when they were young, like time to reflect? So they can do their own work. You don't have to do anything.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Yes.
Okay, I don't see any more questions for you here. So you have to go now?
I don't know what time it is.
7:50.
Okay, yes, I do have to go. I just looked at it. Yes, but this has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you,
Jasmine.
For everyone, please go purchase Jasmine's book, 12 Ways to Cope with Your Latina Mom and Her Difficulties. She also has it for the dad. This is the one I'm reading. And there's the journal as well, which has, it's a guided journal with 40 prompts and questions for understanding, accepting, and grieving your emotionally distant relationship from your parents. I need to work through this journal.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Well, have a good night, ladies. And
Thank
so
you,
nice
Jasmine.
to do this conversation.
Thank you.
Nice
Have a good
talking to you,
evening.
Jasmine.
Bye.
Bye.
Lizbel, you were laughing at me the whole time that I was making these comments because can you talk about some of your experiences?
You know, it's funny. Somebody in the comments said that your Dominican voice was triggering because it sounds too realistic.
Oh yeah.
When you said that, I was like, "Ay Dios, llamo papi." my father has said that to me my whole life. I will go 2-3 days without calling him, and when I do, he's like, "Ay, tú tienes padre, tú tienes un papá."
Right. They kind of guilt.
Tú tienes que llamarme. But that goes to show that a lot of our parents don't know how to be parents. They just teach us how to be their children, and they expect you to do the things that they're supposed to do. Even the other day, one of my uncles, he said, for a parent, a child should always be there for them, no matter what, because the parent is the person who gave you the gift of life. What? So you telling me, first of all you did was have sex, and you had fun doing that. So don't give me that whole guilt thing. You had sex, something happened, you was probably pissed about it at first, but here we are now. And now you're trying to teach me how to like basically be your child for the rest of my life. And I made a post about this too, where it's like,
even if that parent was abusive or that parent abandoned you and never showed up for you, you're supposed to show up for that parent.
Yeah, because you're their child. And that's like the thinking of the old days, you know, no matter what, because I gave you life, you basically are my servant, and you're my servant for the rest of my life. And you need to be emotionally there for me, financially. When I get sick, I need you to be there for me. No matter what you did for my childhood, even if you were absent, even if you were abusive, just because you are my parent, you think that you deserve these rights. And they got this generation completely messed up.
No, that's not happening.
Exactly.
For everyone in the comments section, do you have any questions for Lizbel? Carolina said, the goal is to understand we are not responsible for our parents.
Yep. I see it. It takes some time to get rid of that guilt that they was talking about, because at the end of the day, for you to do your own healing journey, it's already stressful and traumatizing. So for you to now dig into the trauma of your elders or people who haven't really done it themselves, you taking on a whole different burden. So it's like, that's why I will have to work on myself. And if you can learn from that, like my mom has learned from it, then great. And I will definitely try to help you throughout my journey, but I can't get the trauma out of you. You know what I mean? Like I have these conversations with my aunts all the time because they are the kind of women who are just tense, you know, like they don't know peace.
Carrying all that.
Yeah, they don't know peace. They don't know what it's like to literally just sit down and have a glass of water because they're always in 15 different directions.
And there are people as well that even when they're near peace, they sabotage it.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what that looks like. Right. And the moment something is still, because I have an aunt like that, you know, I tell my mom, she's not going to change. The moment she, you know, she's anywhere near a peaceful situation, she's gonna disrupt it because disruption is all she knows. Chaos is all she knows. That's where she navigates well, but not in peace. She doesn't know what to do with herself in peace, you know? And imagine, you know, leaving a toxic relationship and you suddenly, well, I've been like that, and you suddenly find yourself, you're like, what am I going to do with myself? Because I spent so many years battling this situation.
Yeah.
Right. And now that I don't have that anymore, what am I going to do? Who am I? It's like you got to figure out who you are and what do you want for yourself and how to maybe, you know, continue in that peaceful situation. Right.
I know for my mom and for my aunts and most of the women in my family are like that, meaning they don't know stillness. They don't know how to be at peace. I remember my brother took them, we all went on an all-inclusive vacation in the Dominican Republic. We went for the year anniversary, and then a few days later we said, let's go to a resort and try to refresh our energy because it was so exhausting. And we took them to a 5-star resort. It was all inclusive. And by like the nighttime in the first day, I couldn't believe it, but they were like, oh, we kind of want to go home. Like, we want to leave. We want to go back to Buena. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is what I talk about in my book. Like, you are raised on literally survival and accumulating your own problems and being the savior to everybody else. So when you finally do have a moment of silence or stillness, it's almost like, wait, what? You're looking for something to do. You're looking for somebody to save or a problem to solve. You can't just be like, you know what? Let me sit down and enjoy this cup of coffee. Let me turn my phone down and let me just look at the sky. Because they have never had a moment where they can sit still and think about, you know, their life or their decisions or what they want. So for them to have a moment of silence is almost like a hell no, you know? So sometimes we do have chaotic lives, and sometimes we make our lives chaotic.
I agree. Carolina saying in the comments that she just feels really inspired by you as she navigates her own feelings and boundaries from her mother. What are some coping skills that you would that you could share with our listeners that worked for you? Because I know a lot of people relate to the content that you share. And I'm pretty sure you get these comments all the time. So, you know, what would be the best advice you would give to someone who is dealing with, you know, trauma, toxic behaviors, trying to create boundaries with a parent or, you know, or a family member?
Well, firstly, thank you, Carolina. Appreciate you for watching and for listening. I will say every parent is different. That's the number one thing. So there are some people who are more narcissistic and will not take any accountability, will not even listen to what you have to say. You know, if you have somebody in your life who is listening to you and at least can sit down and have a conversation with you, then you like 50% ahead of the people who can't. If you have somebody who's listening and actively paying attention to what you're saying. But one thing that you can do, one thing that worked for me, I'll say, is number one, I realized what were my boundaries. I had to sit down and say, all right, what is something that you do that pisses me off, that hurts me, or that, takes me to a different place? Number one, I hated, and I know that you guys can relate to this, I hated when my mom would tell the rest of my family something that I told her in confidence.
Oh, we've been there.
The fact that
oh my God, my mom tries to teach my aunt how to keep secrets. Because my mom says, pero usted divulga todo, usted no tiene que estar contando lo de su hija, que esto con lo otro. And my aunt gets pissed off if my mom doesn't reveal something about us. Like, why didn't you tell me? And my mom is like, no, because whatever my kids share with me is sacred. So mi mamá es la tumba de la familia. Everybody in the family calls her to confess, share secrets, because my mom doesn't share anything. But my aunt, no.
The same
knows that. And that was one of the traumatizing things for my cousins, they always felt like their mom never had their back, because she would just reveal things that, that they would say in a moment of vulnerability, or just wanted to get off of their back. And, I never went through that with my mom, but I could understand what that feels like.
For sure. It messes with your trust. And it makes you not want to tell them or talk to them about things that are maybe sensitive or important. So
Carolina says they call her mom Radio Mil.
Ay, Dios mío.
Informative, because there's nothing that stays with her.
Jesus Christ. You see, I have an aunt just like that. Like, if you want everybody to know something, all you got to do is call her. She's the first person you call. But my mom has been like that too. My mom is like, I don't know what it is with Latina women, but they like bond over gossip or just like talking about everything.
Cafecito con el chisme.
And it's like they can't have a conversation with each other without saying, ay, pero tú viste la hija de Lucina. De que está preñada, tú oíste eso. Like all of that. And I remember I would hear her talking like that and I'd be like, mami, deja de hacer eso porque un día van a estar hablando de uno. Like the same way you talk about other people's kids, they're going to be talking about your kids. Right. And that was one of my triggers. Because I'm a very private person in general. So if I'm saying something to you, just know that it's, that's between me and you. And for me to hear it from another family member or to be walking by and hearing her repeat it, for me, that was one of the things that was like, oh no, that cannot happen. Another thing was her making me a topic of conversation, or my family making me a topic of conversation, whether it be my sexuality, my weight, my hair, no matter what it is, if you're making me a topic of conversation so that other people can pick at it, don't ever do that. But these are things that have happened throughout the years, and it wasn't until I sat down. What I do is, again, number one, I would write down what was my boundary. What is something that you did that can trigger me? That's one of them. Don't tell people what's wrong with me. Don't tell people my business. Number two, don't make me a topic of conversation of gossip with people that you love. Number two was letting myself cool down, because again, I when I'm emotional and I'm angry, I can say things in a nasty tone. And with my mom, it won't work because my mom is very sweet and very, like calm. She doesn't really respond to anger well. So I would sit with my anger, figure out what it is, and then I would say, all right, let me have this conversation with her at a good time, which is when we're both alone, when we're both calm, sitting down, eating. With her specifically, I'll be like painting her nails, or we'll eat lunch together, and I'll tell her, listen, number one, what you did on this day really hurt me. What you said really hurt me. This is why it hurt me, and I'll explain it to her. It hurt me because one thing they'll bring up is my body, like all Dominicans, which is the fucking normal for you to be on a fucking twirling stick and 100 people around you just saying, ay, mira eso, mira eso, mira eso. And they'll do it loudly and proudly, family parties with a fucking microphone. Mm-hmm. So one thing was like, all right, I don't like when you bring me up in a conversation where people are going to pick me apart. That's number one. You should always be the one to stop it. Number two, the reason it hurt me is because I already have issues that I'm dealing with. And to hear other people pick me apart is not good when I already pick myself apart. So that's why it hurt me. Number 3, this is the reason you can never do it again. Because if you want a healthy and happy relationship with me, you need to respect those parts of me that you don't understand yet. And usually when I get to the third part, where it's like, if you cannot follow this, if you want to call it a rule, it's a rule. But if you can't follow this rule, then that shows that you being right now and whatever satisfaction that you're going to get from it matters more than our relationship, matters more than me and you having a healthy and great mother-daughter relationship.
I think that's wonderful advice, writing those things down and talking to your parents about it. And hopefully they're receptive. Manuel said that we're supposed to learn trust from our parents. That's something I learned recently. I think that's why a lot of our communities have trust issues.
Yes.
Because our parents are the first people in our lives to break our trust.
Yes, that's so true. And right? A lot of us were raised around that too. Like a lot of us are raised around your life basically being chisme. Like, did you hear that one of our cousins came out as bisexual, or she came out as a lesbian? Oh, this person got into a relationship and now they're pregnant. You go into school and you dropped out because you want to start into something new. It's like your entire life is on this fucking display and everybody has an opinion about it. And if your parents don't protect you, you can't trust them. And a lot of us have felt like we were against our parents, like our parents were against us. So of course there's not gonna be a lot of trust. And that's why so much of our generation is trying now to get it as adults. But most of our parents, they don't know what that is. You know, they don't know what it is to have a relationship with a child and have it be sacred.
I agree. You have a chapter here on manipulation, right? And you say parents are notorious for using manipulation and get sympathy or favors from their children. They take advantage of the love you have for them and use things that they have done for you to manipulate you into doing things you do not want to do. Nothing makes me happier than shielding amazing people from the leeches of this world. So I want to help you discover any existing predators in your life and protect you from future ones. And then you included here a list of red flags. So you should always take note, but remember, manipulators do not appear out of thin air, but in subtle hints as they ease their way into your mind by getting your trust first. And some of those red flags you mentioned were completely disregarding your personal boundaries and validating your experiences or point of view, has an extreme fear of losing you and does outrageous things to test this. Oh my God. Pressures you to have sex or things you are not comfortable with, is overly critical of you, nitpicks at your looks, personality, or art, lacks of empathy, is hyper focused on your relationships extremely early, has no outside life or responsibilities, overshares in hopes of receiving vital information from you, avoids conflicts and is passive aggressive, gets offended when make decisions for yourself, possessive, extremely jealous and controlling, coerces you into doing things you do not want to do, gives you no privacy or personal space, blames you for pushing them into their violent outbursts. This sounds like a typical narcissist. Intimidates you purposely, disrespects you out loud, apologizes in private, extremely hostile, angry, and dark-spirited whenever you are happy, makes a mockery of your weaknesses and insecurity, talks over you to silence you, makes you feel as if you are stupid or unattractive, uses time against you and gives you ultimatums. They lie unprovoked, are deceptive, and have mastered the art of blaming everyone else to dodge all responsibility. It is always made about them, even when it is not. This is a wonderful list of red flags that I think would be helpful to those who pick up your book. For those who haven't picked up Lizbel's book, it's called Let's Talk About It. You can get it at Amazon, and I'm pretty sure Lizbel has it in some local bookstores. So why was it important for you to include this chapter in here?
Mostly because I feel like our generation suffers with red flags because we were raised by a lot of people who had them. A lot of us were raised by narcissists and people who unfortunately wanted something out of us, and we look for that in our relationships now. A lot of us do, and that's why this whole like toxic relationship thing is a trend now, because so many people think that somebody having ownership or doing these terrible things is somehow an equation of their love. The worse they might treat you, the violent lengths they might go to keep you, you think that they love you when it's really just a control factor. So I wanted to include both green and red flags, because I don't think our generation, I'll just say, we started looking for our parents in our relationships, and instead of us going against and trying to be better, we kind of fell in love and find that in the process.
Yeah, we are attracted to what we know.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So if our parents are narcissists, we're going to attract narcissists. That's where we feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Because that is all we know. Exactly. And I could definitely think of some examples of, parents saying, I mean, I tried the manipulation tactic with my kid. It's just like, you wearing a pair of Yeezys, you could go do the dishes, But I do like things like that, I guess. But yeah, those red flags that you mentioned are really dangerous, I think, because they lead to other things. And sometimes they lead to a lot of confusion, right? Because if you have someone that is breaking your trust and you believed in them or whatnot, that leaves a mark on you, and you end up not being able to trust others. And if you're not able to trust others, you can't build a good foundation, because trust is one of the biggest, parts of foundation of in any relationship. And if you don't have that, then how can you, work on anything, right? Manuel here mentions that he mentions women's bodies are heavily policed in our households by our own families. I've seen it with my sisters. Juvie says, I'm listening to this and just think about how those are such major flags and how often that behavior happens and how it's often normalized. Yeah, definitely is definitely normalized. The red flags are blanketed as love and caring, etc. I know there are many parents who take advantage of their children, and just because they gave birth to them, right? They'll say, yo te parí, tú no sabes todos los sacrificios que yo hice, keeping the lights on, or I went through this, or I experienced the other, and you can't, do the smallest thing for me, right? But there's a reason most of the time why that child isn't doing something for you, right? And I guess that constant reminder of you have to do something for me. You're obligated. I'm demanding you to do something is outrageous. If someone wants to do something, they'll do it out of love, not because they're expected to, not because you're demanded. Carolina says this chapter is so important because a lot of us don't know that these are red flags, especially in our community, where jealousy, especially coming from men towards women, and that leads to abuse. Yes, let's talk about the patriarchy. You have a lot of thoughts on that, and machismo.
Yes, that's extremely true. If you're raised by somebody who's a narcissist and has been their whole life, eventually that's what you look for in a partner, and you don't know that's what you're craving, and it goes right back to trauma, because not trauma in general, but generational trauma, because somebody like me watching my mother go through it with men in general. I read this in the book, It Didn't Start With You. They say that sometimes you take on the trauma of your parents, and sometimes you take on the trauma from going against it. So while my mom suffered with men and she was treated terribly by sexist men, my sister fell into the category of finding those men, of like falling in love with those same kind of men and basically inheriting the same thing my mom did. And my trauma was me going against it completely. And that goes with where my resistance comes from, because I saw my mom suffer and I'm like, oh, hell no. So I say, when something happens, you either become the person who continues it or you become the opposite in spite of it. And I became the opposite in spite of it, but it's still a result of trauma. You know what I mean? It doesn't make me better than my sister because at the end of the day, we're both reacting to the way that we were raised and what we saw. But with sexist men in our families, I don't even know where to start. We could talk about sexual abuse. We could talk about how there's a lot of dads who aren't present. You know, we could talk about narcissistic moms who treat their daughters like their enemies. So we could do a whole. That's a whole nother 3-hour segment where we could talk about family and the way women are treated and the results. Because for so many of us, we were taught, mira, calladita te ve mejor. So just be quiet, don't complain, don't shout, don't cry, just sit down, focus on being pretty and mind your business. And that has created a lot of women who tolerate a lot. It's created a generation of women who won't talk back, who won't be opinionated, who won't say what's on their mind, who won't defend themselves. And it's because we were taught this is what you need to do. This is the way that you need to be.
Yeah, who are silently abused.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, this goes back to, you know, when all the reporting during the Me Too movement, people were always saying, well, why did you wait so long to say something? Well, it's been 10 years. Why are you talking about it? You should have said something back then. And people just don't understand, you know, how difficult that is, especially when you're brought up to understand that you're not going to be believed, or that you don't matter.
For sure.
Right. That whatever happened to you is insignificant and you should just look away and keep living your life the way you've been living it. And like you said, there's so much that can be said about that. I don't want to keep you much longer. If anyone has any more questions for Lizbel, please ask her now. Lizbel, I want to thank you for being here with us. It's always a great experience to talk with you and have these conversations. And, you know, I'm a fan of all the content that you share on social media, as I'm sure is most of the people watching on the live. Do we have any more questions for Lizbel, or I could just send her to go watch some Netflix or reading now, Lizbel?
What happened?
What are you reading?
I'm actually reading How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole Lepera. It actually came out, I think it came out last year. She's the holistic psychologist, and I found her on Instagram. I've been following her for like 3 years, and I've learned so fucking much from her. But
there you go. What are your book recommendations? What books have helped you?
All right, I have my little stash behind me, but off of the top of my head, one of my favorite books of all time is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I believe by Dr. Susan Jeffers. And that is one of the first books that I read. And I was like, all right, let me do what I need. Let me do what I came to this world to do, you know? Another book, what's another one? How to Win Friends and Influence People. I know that that's like super cliche, but that really did help me. What's another one? Outwitting the Devil. Outwitting the Devil changed my life. I never read the book, but I read the audio, and I recommend hearing the audio because they have different characters. But Outwitting the Devil changed my life. That book put me on a different pedestal mentally.
Mention It Starts With You, or what was it?
It Didn't Start With You.
It Didn't Start With You.
Yeah. I read that book. I ran it into the ground. The cover came off because it was like I had it with me in DR. But that's another one of my favorite books. It Didn't Start With You. What else? There's so many, but my favorite, Unstoppable Confidence as well. Unstoppable Confidence. I could get you, matter of fact, give me a second.
No, I'm gonna email you, Lizbel, and ask you for a list so that we could share it on our social media.
Yes, let's do that. Give me some time. Also, Will You Be Mother? Will You Be Mother was a really good book because I was I didn't know if I wanted to be a mom. I didn't really know if I even like children. So that book was beautiful because it gives you the answers to a lot of the questions. So if you're a woman and you have any thoughts, if you're not a mom yet, definitely pick that book up.
Yeah, I was one of those people that I said I never wanted to be a mom.
Girl. I think a lot of that, well, not a lot of it. I'll say that some of it is based out of like our own traumatic experiences. And then some people really just don't fucking want kids. So, but that's what the book is about.
And changed all that.
Oh, that's dope. Honestly, I would say the same thing. Like I always, my entire life, I said, I don't want kids. I don't want kids. I don't want kids. And then the more my cousins had babies, I was like, all right, let me see what that's about.
Just babysit them. You good babysitting them right now. Babysit them a couple of hours, and then those are the ones that you could return. Yours, you gotta keep.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm gonna take my time. But that book, Will You Be Mother? It really helps you decide. Like, it gives so many different women's perspective too. They have different stories of women who didn't want and ended up having, or who didn't want and never ended up having, and they're still happy.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to email you for that list of books.
Okay.
All right. It doesn't seem that we have any more questions, but they're looking forward to the list of books.
I got you, girl.
Thank you so much for being with me here today and answering our questions and talking about these topics that I think are so very important. We will be starting a mental health series in March. I haven't posted it yet, but a lot of this stuff comes up in our writing. We have these writing sessions every Sunday. And so I was telling you before that it keeps coming up in our writers, right? Because like Jasmine said, journaling is one of the best ways and the most therapeutic ways for you to get over your feelings, putting them on paper and just letting go of that. And it keeps coming up for our writers, and we're going to do a mental health series that's going to last the entire month of March. You're welcome to join, and we're going to be tackling a lot of these topics that we spoke of today. So I want to invite everyone that was here with us today to also stay tuned, subscribe to our newsletter, and we will be announcing it. But like I was saying, if you have not purchased Lizbel's book, please go do so. She's so tons. Let's have her sell more, please. Okay. And Jasmine's books, like I mentioned, were 12 Ways to Cope with Your Latina Mom and Her Difficulties, 12 Ways to Cope with Your Latino Dad, and then she has the writing prompts and journals to help you guys along the way. Lizbel, where can everyone follow you on social media? For those new
follow me on Instagram, Lizbel Ortiz. All of my handles on socials are Lizbel Ortiz. My YouTube,
on TikTok, Instagram. Are you on Twitter?
Yes, I am on Twitter. On Twitter, I'm Liz the Godmother.
Okay.
I've had that username.
People blast on Twitter too?
Do I? Yeah, sometimes.
I gotta see that.
But I really do. I really just stay on TikTok. That's where that's where my tribe is.
Okay. All right then. Thank you so much, Lizbel. Have a good night. Good night, everybody.